Millionaire forces waitress to play. Piano at party to embarrass her, and her talent shocks everyone. She worked double shifts, kept her head down, and never complained. But that night, a millionaire decided to turn her dignity into a joke. He called her out in front of everyone, forcing her to play the piano just to humiliate her. The crowd waited for her to fail. What he didn't know was that the woman he tried to mock once had a dream and a gift he could never buy. When her fingers touched the keys, the entire room went silent. The dinner rush had just begun at the Four Seasons Grill, Miami Beach's crown jewel of fine dining. The air shimmered with low music and quiet money designer perfumes mingling with the scent of seared filet and truffle butter. Heels clicked against marble floors. Laughter rose and fell like soft waves. It was the kind of place where everyone spoke in measured tones, and even the waiters moved as if choreographed. Among them was Skylar Jolie, balancing a tray of crystal glasses with the easy grace of someone who had learned to hide exhaustion behind a practiced smile. In her late 20s, but already carrying herself with the composure of someone twice her age, she glided between tables as if she belonged among the chandeliers and white linen. Her hair long, black, and gleaming was tied neatly in a bun. Only the faint shadows under her eyes betrayed the truth. This was her second shift of the day. Still, she kept that smile. Because rent didn't care about tired feet. Because her grandmother's medication came before her own needs. Because her younger sister's hospital bills didn't stop arriving just because she wanted to rest. "Table 12 needs another bottle of wine," whispered one of the servers as they passed each other. Skylar nodded automatically. "Table 12. The moment she heard it, her stomach tightened. That was his table, the one everyone secretly dreaded. Connor Zuckerberg. A name whispered behind the kitchen doors with the same tone reserved for storms you hoped would pass quickly. He was a self-made tech millionaire, or so he liked to remind everyone, who had once developed some trading software that made him rich before 30. He came in often, usually with clients or investors, and every server in the building knew that dealing with him meant walking a tightrope. One wrong step, one imperfect pour, and he'd have your manager on speed dial. When Skylar approached the table, she could already feel his eyes on her, the kind of gaze that didn't look at you so much as through you. "Ah, finally," he said, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh. We were starting to think the service here had gone downhill. The men and women around him, investors, no doubt offered polite chuckles, the nervous kind that said don't draw his attention. Skylar set the wine bottle on the table with steady hands, refusing to let the comment touch her. She dealt with worse. "My apologies for the delay, sir," she said evenly. "Would you like to taste it first?" Her tone was professional, gentle, but firm, the way she'd learned to speak when pride had to be hidden behind courtesy. As she poured, she felt his gaze linger. Connor Zuckerberg had that look of men who'd never been told no in their lives, sharp, assessing, and faintly amused, as if every person in his line of sight existed solely to entertain him. "You're efficient," he said finally, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. "We're hosting a private gala next weekend. My place. Star Island. Very selective guest list." He paused, letting the words hang. "Like bait? I could use someone with your level of composure." Skylar hesitated. That kind of job, one night's work, could pay for her sister's next round of treatment and still leave enough to cover groceries. Her instincts told her to say no, but necessity had its own gravity. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Zuckerberg," she replied. "I'd be happy to help." He smirked. "Good. I'll have my assistant send the details." And just like that, the deal was made. A few scribbles on a notepad, a few polite words, and she'd stepped unknowingly into the turning point of her life. As Skylar carried the empty tray back toward the kitchen, she passed the grand piano near the restaurant's entrance, a black Bosendorfer that gleamed softly under the lights. The soft violin track playing through the speakers faded for a moment, and something inside her stirred. Her fingers twitched at her side. For one fragile heartbeat, she almost reached out. But she didn't. She hadn't touched a piano in 10 years. Not since that night when everything, her parents, her future, her music had been torn away in a single phone call. She took a deep breath, forcing her focus back to the hum of the restaurant, the clatter of dishes, the rhythm she understood. Still, as she tied her apron tighter, she couldn't shake the faint ache in her chest, that haunting sense that something long buried was waiting to be heard again. A week later, The night of the gala arrived. Skylar stood at the edge of Zuckerberg Villa, clutching her serving jacket against the cool Miami breeze. The mansion loomed ahead, a palace of glass, light, and impossible wealth. From the driveway, she could see fountains spilling over white stone, luxury cars lined in perfect order, and guests stepping out of limousines wrapped in diamonds and confidence. She reminded herself why she was there. One night's work, enough money to buy time for her family, for her sister, maybe even for herself. That was all that mattered. Inside, a woman with steel gray hair was barking orders at the serving staff. Remember, Mr. Zuckerberg's guests are Miami's elite. No mistakes. No chatter. Smile. Serve. Disappear. Skylar was assigned to the main living room, the centerpiece of the party. When she stepped inside, she had to catch her breath. The chandeliers glittered like constellations. Every inch of the room seemed designed to whisper wealth the marble floors. The crystal glasses, the art worth more than her apartment building. And there, in the far corner beneath the soft halo of the chandelier, stood another Bosendorfer grand piano. Not just any one, the same model she'd played during her years at the New World School of the Arts. Her pulse stumbled. For a second, the world narrowed to that single instrument. She didn't hear the footsteps until a voice spoke behind her. Don't even think about touching it. Skylar turned. Zuckerberg stood there, tuxedo immaculate, glass of scotch in hand, his mouth curved in that same superior half-smile. That piano costs more than most people's houses, he said casually. We've got a professional musician coming in later. Try not to get fingerprints on it. His words hit their mark, polished, cruel, and delivered with the effortlessness of someone born to condescend. Skylar lowered her eyes. Of course, sir. The evening unfolded in a blur of motion silver trays, champagne flutes, polite laughter. Skylar worked like a shadow, graceful and invisible, while the rich mingled and compared yachts, properties, and vacation homes. Every so often, her eyes would drift toward the piano, its glossy black surface gleaming under the chandelier. She told herself to look away, but couldn't. Then, midway through the evening, the atmosphere shifted. Zuckerberg's phone rang. His voice, low and irritated at first, rose sharply. You're canceling. Now, I paid you already. A pause. Then, louder. Find someone else. At this hour, he ended the call with a curse. The pianist had canceled. The party's energy began to fade like champagne going flat. Conversations slowed. The room felt oddly empty without the music that had been meant to fill it. That was when Zuckerberg's gaze fell on Skylar. You? He said suddenly, pointing at her across the room. Every conversation stopped. The clink of crystal halted. Skylar froze, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. I've seen you eyeing that piano all night, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Think you can do better than serve drinks? Her mouth opened, but no words came. The guests looked from her to him, uneasy, curious. He was enjoying this. The smirk returned, sharp and deliberate. Come on, he pressed, taking the tray from her hands and setting it aside. Let's see what you've got. Unless, of course, you're afraid? The words burned. He wasn't offering her a chance, he was setting a trap. Skylar could hear her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. Sometimes, child, you bow not out of weakness but out of strength. For years, she had bowed to survival, to responsibility, to exhaustion. But now, surrounded by the glittering emptiness of that room, something inside her rebelled. The humiliation he meant to inflict had sparked something she thought long-dead pride, courage, maybe even defiance. The piano seemed to call to her, like an old friend whispering across the years. 10 years of silence sat heavy on her shoulders as she took her first step forward. The crowd parted slightly, murmuring. Her palms were damp. Her heart hammered. She didn't know whether she was walking toward redemption or another kind of ruin, but she walked anyway, because some melodies, once begun, refused to stay quiet forever. As Skylar Jolie walked toward the piano, memories flooded back like a tidal wave. She remembered the old upright piano in their living room where her mother first taught her to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star when she was just 4 years old. Her tiny fingers would stretch across the keys while sitting on a stack of foam books to reach the proper height. Those early lessons had turned into something more when her elementary school music teacher noticed her talent. "Your daughter has a gift," she had told Skylar Jolie's parents. "She hears music differently than other children." Before long, Skylar Jolie was performing in local competitions, her mother beaming proudly from the audience, her father recording every performance on their old camcorder. The acceptance letter from New World School of the Arts pre-college program had felt like a golden ticket. Every Saturday, her father would drive her into the city from their modest home in Little Havana, Miami, leaving at dawn to beat the traffic. She'd spend entire days immersed in music theory, practice sessions, and performances. Her teachers spoke of future concert halls and international tours. The other students came from wealthy families, but in the practice rooms only talent mattered. Then came that rainy October night 10 years ago. Skylar Jolie had been practicing late at school for an upcoming recital when her grandmother called. Her parents' car had skidded on the wet highway. They never made it home. The following weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and impossible decisions. Her sister, only 8 at the time, needed special medical care for her chronic condition. Their grandmother, who moved in to take care of them, was too old to work. The insurance money wouldn't last long. Skylar Jolie still remembered standing in the New World School of the Arts administrative office, withdrawing from the program. Her teacher had protested, talking about scholarships and special arrangements, but Skylar Jolie knew the truth. Her family needed her to work, not chase dreams. She found the waitressing job at the Four Seasons Grill through a family friend. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere reminded her of concert halls, and sometimes during quiet moments, she would hear classical music in her head, her fingers moving slightly as she carried plates. Over the years, she'd avoided pianos completely. The grand piano at the restaurant was easy to ignore. It was usually covered, and the pianists who played there were professionals who came and went without speaking to the staff. But this Bosendorfer before her now was different. It stood proud and open, its black surface gleaming under the chandelier lights, keys waiting expectantly like old friends hoping to reconnect. A murmur went through the crowd as she approached the instrument. She could hear Zuckerberg's smug chuckle, could feel the weight of judgment from his wealthy guests. They were expecting a disaster, a clumsy server embarrassing herself for their entertainment. What they didn't see were the calluses still on her fingers from years of practice, hidden beneath the professional manicure required for serving. They didn't know about the countless hours she spent mastering scales and arpeggios, or the way she still heard symphonies in her dreams. As she sat down on the bench, adjusting it with the familiar motion that had once been as natural as breathing, her grandmother's words from long ago echoed in her mind. "Music is in your blood, little one. It's not something you do. It's something you are." Skylar Jolie placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingers. The muscle memory was there, waiting like a language she'd learned in childhood, rusty from disuse but not forgotten. In that moment, she wasn't the server anymore. She was that young girl again, sitting at her first recital, her mother's voice whispering, "Play from your heart and they will listen." The party guests had formed a loose circle around the grand piano, their faces showing a mix of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment. Crystal glasses clinked as people shifted uncomfortably, waiting for what they assumed would be an awkward spectacle. Zuckerberg stood at the front, his expression caught between amusement and impatience. Skylar Jolie closed her eyes for a moment, letting the familiar smell of polished wood and ivory wash over her. The Bosendorfer even smelled expensive, a rich, deep scent that spoke of careful maintenance and regular tuning. Her serving uniform felt stiff and confining as she adjusted her posture on the bench, muscle memory from countless lessons taking over. "Well," Zuckerberg's voice cut through her concentration, "we don't have all night." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Poor girl," just loud enough for Skylar Jolie to hear. Taking a deep breath, Skylar Jolie recalled her last performance at New World School of the Arts. She had played Liszt that day too, her mother's favorite composer. The piece had earned her a standing ovation and a nomination for a prestigious young artist competition, a competition she never got to attend. The first notes of Liszt's Liebesträume No. 3 floated into the air. Skylar Jolie's fingers moved tentatively at first, like someone testing the temperature of a pool before diving in. The piece started softly, almost questioning, perfect for her uncertain return to the keys after so long. A woman in a red designer dress who had been mid-sip of champagne slowly lowered her glass. The quiet conversations around the piano died away. Even the servers stopped their rounds, standing still with their trays of appetizers, watching as Skylar Jolie reached the end of the first phrase. Muscle memory fully kicked in. Her hands remembered the way the piece swelled and softened, like waves on a peaceful shore. The Bosendorfer responded beautifully to her touch, its rich tone filling the massive room with warmth. Zuckerberg's smirk began to fade. He took a step closer to the piano, his brow furrowing as he watched Skylar Jolie's fingers dance across the keys with increasing confidence. This wasn't the fumbling attempt he had expected. This was something else entirely. The piece grew more complex, building toward its emotional center. Skylar Jolie felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't stop. Each note brought back memories. Her mother humming along as she practiced, her father's proud smile, her sister falling asleep on the couch listening to her play. An older gentleman in the crowd leaned forward, his eyes wide with recognition. He whispered something to his companion, who nodded vigorously. Skylar Jolie didn't notice she was lost in the music now. Her body sang slightly as she played the flowing melody. The room's atmosphere had transformed. The same people who moments ago had been preparing to witness her humiliation now stood transfixed. Some had closed their eyes. Others wore expressions of genuine amazement. A young woman in the back wiped away a tear as Skylar Jolie approached the piece's climax. Her fingers moved with the surety of someone who had played this music thousands of times. The Bosendorfer sang under her touch, its powerful bass notes resonating through the floorboards while the higher registers sparkled like starlight. Zuckerberg stood frozen, his half-empty wine glass forgotten in his hand. The cruel entertainment he had planned had turned into something entirely unexpected. Instead of humiliating a server, he had unknowingly put a masterful musician on display. The piece's final section approached, and Skylar Jolie played it with all the emotion she had held back over the years. Each note carried the weight of her sacrificed dreams, her love for her family, and the unexpected joy of returning to her first love, music. As she played the final phrases, time seemed to stop in the grand room. Every person held captive by the beauty of what they were witnessing. As the last notes of Liszt's Liebesträume faded into the hushed silence of the room, Skylar Jolie's hands rested gently on the keys. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The spell of her performance hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and ethereal. Then, as if a dam had broken, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, reserved clapping of wealthy people being charitable. It was genuine, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. People were standing, some wiping tears from their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Extraordinary, breathed a silver-haired woman in a blue evening gown. Simply extraordinary. Her companion nodded vigorously, still clapping. Skylar Jolie felt her cheeks flush as she stood from the piano bench. The familiar motion of smoothing her serving apron brought her back to reality. She was still at work, still there to serve these people. But something had shifted in the way they looked at her. Zuckerberg stood rooted to his spot, his face a complex mixture of emotions: embarrassment, amazement, and something that might have been shame. The cruel joke he had intended had transformed into a moment of unexpected beauty, and he didn't quite know how to handle it. "Young lady?" A distinguished-looking gentleman made his way through the crowd. His accent was European, possibly German, and he carried himself with the air of someone important. That was a remarkable interpretation of Liszt. "Where did you study before?" Before Skylar Jolie could answer, another voice cut in. "She doesn't just serve drinks, does she?" Zuckerberg. This came from a woman in her 50s, her gray hair elegantly styled, wearing a simple but obviously expensive black dress. "I'm curious. Did you know about her talent when you tried to humiliate her?" Zuckerberg opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, the wealthy tech millionaire seemed at a loss for words. The European gentleman was still focused on Skylar Jolie. "My dear, I'm the director of the Miami Symphony Orchestra MISO. We have a community program that brings music education to underprivileged children. Would you be interested in teaching? The salary is modest compared to performing." "But..." "What?" Skylar Jolie's heart skipped a beat. Teaching music. The possibility of returning to the world she had left behind, even in a different role, made her hands tremble slightly. I haven't played in 10 years, she admitted softly. "Not since my parents..." Her voice trailed off, but the symphony director's kind eyes showed understanding. "Music never truly leaves us," he said gently. What you just played proved that. Think about it. Here's my card. Other guests began approaching, each with their own questions and comments. A mother asked if Skylar Jolie would consider teaching her daughter. A retired pianist wanted to discuss her technique. The woman in the black dress turned out to be a board member at a prestigious music school. In the midst of this, Skylar Jolie caught sight of Zuckerberg making his way toward her. The crowd parted slightly, watching with interest. He stopped in front of her and for a moment just looked at her. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his usual arrogance absent from his voice. What I tried to do, it was cruel and beneath me." He paused, then continued. "Would you tell me your story? The real one. Not just what's on your job application." Skylar Jolie looked at the man who had tried to embarrass her just minutes ago, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. Around them, the party had resumed its normal flow, but nothing felt normal anymore. In the span of one piece of music, her world had shifted on its axis. She glanced at the piano, then back at Zuckerberg. "It's a long story," she said softly. "And it begins with an old upright piano and a little girl who fell in love with music." As the party continued around them, Skylar Jolie and Zuckerberg sat in a quiet corner of the vast living room. She had removed her serving apron and someone had handed her a glass of water. The piano stood silently in the background, a reminder of how quickly life can change. "I was 12 when I got into New World School of the Arts pre-college program," Skylar Jolie began, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her water glass. "My parents were immigrants. My father worked as a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses. They spent every extra penny on my music lessons." Zuckerberg listened intently, his usual impatience nowhere to be seen. The symphony director had joined them along with the woman in the black dress who introduced herself as a trustee of the University of Miami Frost School of Music. "Every Saturday, my father would drive me into the city. He never complained of the early mornings or the long waits. He'd pack lunch for us both, always bringing extra in case I made new friends." Skylar Jolie smiled at the memory. "My mother recorded every single performance on this old video camera. She said she wanted to document my journey to the Adrienne Arsht Center." She paused, taking a sip of water. "Then came the accident. My sister was 8, already dealing with her medical condition. Our grandmother moved in to help, but she was too old to work. Someone had to support the family, and I was the oldest." "But why completely stop playing?" the symphony director asked gently. "Surely there were other options." Skylar Jolie shook her head. "When you're 16 and suddenly responsible for 3 people's survival, you learn to put dreams away. I couldn't practice 4 hours a day and work enough to pay the bills. The restaurant job paid well, had good tips. It seemed like the responsible choice." Zuckerberg shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and all this time at the Four Seasons Grill, hearing the pianist there. "I learned to tune it out," Skylar Jolie said quietly. "It hurt less that way. But sometimes late at night when the restaurant was almost empty, I'd hear a piece my mother loved." And she trailed off, her eyes distant. The trustee leaned forward. "Your talent hasn't diminished. What you played tonight, that wasn't just muscle memory. That was pure musicianship. The teaching position," the symphony director added, "it could be just the beginning. We have practice rooms you could use. There are adult education programs, performance opportunities." Zuckerberg suddenly stood up. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "I'd like to help," he said, his voice firm. "A scholarship fund perhaps for students like you who are talented but facing difficult circumstances." Skylar Jolie stared at him, remembering his cruel smirk just hours ago. "People really could surprise you." And he continued, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know the owner of the Four Seasons Grill. I could speak to him about adjusting your schedule, making it more flexible if you decide to pursue music again." The trustee nodded, approving. The academy could provide performance spaces for the scholarship students. Maybe even... She paused, looking at Skylar Jolie. "Would you consider sharing your story with them? Show them that setbacks don't have to be permanent." Skylar Jolie felt tears forming in her eyes. She thought about her grandmother, who still hummed her old practice pieces while cooking, her sister who had never really heard her play, the years of pushing aside her passion to be responsible. "I'd need time to practice," she said slowly, "to get back to where I was." "Time heals," the symphony director said kindly. "And music, Music waits for us. It's patient that way. Skylar Jolie looked across the room at the Bosendorfer, its keys still visible in the warm light. For the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where responsibility and passion could coexist, where the weight of her past could become a foundation instead of a burden. Where would we start? She asked softly. 3 weeks after the party, Skylar Jolie stood in front of a room full of children at the community music center. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and restlessness as they sat cross-legged on the carpet. A row of keyboards lined the walls, and an old upright piano stood at the front of the room. "Music is like magic," she began, her voice gentle but carrying to every corner. "It can make you happy when you're sad, give you energy when you're tired, and tell stories without using any words." A small boy in the front raised his hand. "My mom says I have to practice every day, but I don't want to," he said with complete honesty. Making the other children giggle, Skylar Jolie smiled, remembering her own childhood struggles. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked, kneeling down to their level. "When I was your age, I sometimes didn't want to practice either." She walked to the old upright piano, running her fingers along its scratched surface. The symphony director had been right. Getting back into music wasn't like starting over, but like waking up a sleeping part of herself. "But then my mother taught me something special," she continued. "She said practicing isn't about playing the same thing over and over. It's about telling your own story through music." Skylar Jolie sat at the piano and played a simple melody with one hand. "This could be the sound of rain on your window," she added, her left hand creating a gentle harmony. "And this could be the sound of your cat purring or your baby sister laughing." The children leaned forward, their eyes wide. Even the restless ones had gone still, watching her hands move across the keys. Later that afternoon, Skylar Jolie sat in one of the practice rooms working on a piece for her upcoming recital. Zuckerberg had kept his word. Not only had he spoken to the restaurant owner about her schedule, but he had also established a scholarship fund for young musicians facing financial hardships. The trustee from the Music Academy had become her mentor, helping her navigate her return to the music world. "You're not just teaching them notes," she had told Skylar Jolie. "You're showing them that dreams can take detours but still find their way home." Skylar Jolie's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence. She was practicing Saint-Saëns now, her grandmother's favorite. The piece still needed work, but each day brought back more of her old skill, enhanced by a depth of emotion that only life experience could bring. A knock at the practice room door made her pause. It was her sister, home from college for the weekend. Since the party, Skylar Jolie had started teaching her simple pieces on their grandmother's old keyboard. It wasn't a Bosendorfer, but it made music all the same. "The kids love you," her sister said, settling into a chair. "I heard them in the hallway. One little girl told her mother she wants to be just like teacher Skylar Jolie when she grows up." Skylar Jolie felt her heart warm at those words. She thought about that little girl and all the other children in her class. Some came from families like hers had been, struggling to make ends meet but determined to give their children every opportunity. Others had different challenges, different dreams. "Ready to try that duet?" Skylar Jolie asked her sister, scooting over on the piano bench. Their grandmother had always said that music sounded better when shared. As they played together, Skylar Jolie realized that her mother had been right all those years ago. Playing from the heart made people listen. But what she hadn't known then was that sometimes life takes away one dream to lead you to another one that's bigger than yourself. Through the practice room window, she could see the afternoon sun painting the city in shades of gold. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, another young musician might be setting aside their dreams, thinking they had to choose between passion and responsibility. Skylar Jolie hoped her story would reach them, showing that sometimes the most beautiful melodies come after the longest rests. 1 year later, Skylar Jolie stood backstage at the community center's auditorium, her heart racing with familiar pre-performance butterflies. The annual student showcase was about to begin, and through the curtain she could hear the excited murmur of the packed audience. Her students were lined up beside her, dressed in their best outfits, nervously adjusting their sheet music. The little boy who had once complained about practicing was now bouncing on his toes, eager to show off the piece he had mastered. "Remember what we talked about?" Skylar Jolie whispered to them, kneeling down. "It's not about playing perfectly. It's about sharing your love of music." In the audience sat her grandmother, beaming with pride alongside her sister who had driven in from college for the event. Zuckerberg was there too. He had become one of the program's biggest supporters, regularly attending student recitals and funding additional music education initiatives across the city. The showcase began with her youngest students playing simple duets, their small fingers carefully picking out melodies that had practiced for weeks. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause, parents leaning forward to record every moment on their phones, just as Skylar Jolie's mother had done years ago. During intermission, the symphony director found her backstage. "The board is impressed with what you've accomplished here," he said warmly. "They want to expand the program to other community centers. We'd like you to help develop the curriculum." Skylar Jolie felt tears pricking at her eyes. Her teaching schedule had grown from one small class to several, including an evening program for adults who, like her, had set aside their musical dreams. Some of her students were former servers, office workers, and taxi drivers, all finding their way back to music. The second half of the showcase featured her advanced students. As she watched them perform, she remembered each breakthrough moment, each small victory that had led to this point. For the finale, Skylar Jolie had planned something special. She took her place at the grand piano, a new one donated by Zuckerberg to replace the old upright. Her students gathered around, each holding their instruments. Together they performed an arrangement she had written, weaving together classical themes with simple melodies her students had composed. It was a piece about journeys, about falling down and getting back up, about dreams that take unexpected paths. As the last notes faded, Skylar Jolie caught sight of a new face in the audience, the owner of the Four Seasons Grill. She still worked there occasionally, but now as the restaurant's regular pianist for special events, life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. After the performance during the reception, her grandmother pulled her aside. In her hands was an old worn envelope. "Your mother wrote this," she said softly, "the day you got into New World School of the Arts. She wanted you to read it when you gave your first big concert." Skylar Jolie opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, in her mother's elegant handwriting, was a simple message. "Music will always lead you home." Looking around the room at her students chatting excitedly with their families, at Zuckerberg discussing future programs with the symphony director, at her sister recording everything on her phone just like their mother used to do, Skylar Jolie felt a deep sense of peace. She hadn't become the concert pianist her parents had dreamed of, but she had found something perhaps even more meaningful, the ability to keep their love of music alive by passing it on to others. Every time one of her students discovered the joy of playing, every time an adult rekindled their passion for music, her parents' legacy grew stronger. The community center lights began to dim, signaling the end of the evening. But for Skylar Jolie and her students, this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new pieces to learn, new challenges to overcome, and new dreams to chase. As she gathered her sheet music, Skylar Jolie hummed softly to herself, the same lullaby her mother used to sing, now transformed into a song of hope for the future. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the heart's detours, from the unexpected harmonies life creates when we're brave enough to play a different tune. Sometimes life breaks us just to remind us how strong we can be when we rise again. The beauty of a comeback isn't in perfection, it's in courage. If this story touched something in you, let me know where you're listening from right now, your city, your quiet corner, your late night walk. I read every comment. And if you believe in stories that heal the heart, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more waiting for you.